This is such a great opportunity to have such a great panel to discuss such a timely problem, and that is how can we target aging? We know that aging is so flexible. How can we target it? But even more important than that, these times are crucial times that demonstrates how important it is for us to target aging. Because with the COVID problem, what you see in these slides with data from China and Italy and US and the rest of Europe is that if you're over the age of 80, you're 200 times more likely to die than if you're in the 20. It really is ageism at its best or its worst. Why is it that COVID-19 hits the elderly? And what can we do about it? And you know, we are here at a time when we went already from hope to promise. We know that aging can be targeted. And now on the way from promise to realizing it, we're kind of stuck. What can we do about it? And the point that's very important for the COVID is we are all trying to attack the virus, but there is another way to go about it, and this is to defend the host. And this is what we've been studying, and this is what we're good at. This is what the promise is. And we have all those hallmarks of aging that I'm not going to go into that in great detail now, and they are interconnected. You don't have to treat everything in order to, or to target everything in order to have progress. But you see that immune dysfunction and inflammation is part of it. So if we could improve immunity and if we can stop inflammation, we're going to have a lot of say in COVID. But there's more than just the immunity. What we need to do is not only to improve the immunity and inflammation of the elderly, but also to make the rest of their body resistant to the severe disease. And it's important against COVID, it's important against any pandemic in the future, and it's important for other diseases and not only for COVID. So with this as an introduction, I want first to go to Joan Mannick, who is the CEO of resTORbio, and ask Joan, can you connect between aging and immunity? Do you have an example that is ready maybe to test, maybe to give, that will connect those two issues?
Yeah, thank you, Nir. So absolutely. As everyone on this panel knows, there are some common denominator biologic mechanisms that contribute to why organ systems age, including why the immune system ages. And there's data that if we target these basic biologic mechanisms, we can make the function of the aging immune system better. And if we can do that, that will protect older adults from infectious diseases, including COVID-19. And it's a completely different way of approaching this problem, as Nir mentioned. It's not targeting the virus, it's targeting the immune system of older people to make the immune system more robust and better able to fight, in particular, viral infections, which are, even before COVID-19, people didn't realize respiratory viruses were the 8th leading cause of death in people over 65 and the 4th leading cause of hospitalization. So this is a problem that pre-existed COVID-19, but COVID-19 is sort of highlighting the issue. At resTORbio, we targeted one mechanism, which is the activity of a protein complex called TORC1 to improve immune function. And in phase 2 trials, we showed that upregulated innate antiviral gene expression and protected elderly from viral respiratory tract infections. We then went on to talk with the FDA, and as we go into these areas of aging, these are new areas for the FDA as well. And when we talked to them, they said people don't care if they have a laboratory confirmed respiratory tract infection. This was pre-COVID-19. They only care about symptoms. So we want as an endpoint showing that you can decrease symptoms, respiratory symptoms, not laboratory confirmed infections. We didn't hit that endpoint. That's not what our drug turns out to do. It seems to have much more of an effect on laboratory confirmed viral infections, but that opens an opportunity for COVID-19.
But Joan, your phase 2b studies, what was the effect on the severity of diseases in the elderly and the length of the disease?
Yes, so we decrease severity. When we define severity as severe symptoms, we decrease the percent of people who had laboratory confirmed viral respiratory tract infections with severe symptoms by 50% by targeting the fundamental biology of aging and getting this sort of antiviral immunity boosted. And it's just interesting, that's what you can do when you target aging to an older immune system. And then we decrease the time to alleviation of moderate to severe symptoms of people. That's the endpoint used to approve influenza drugs by 5 days. And that's versus oseltamivir or Tamiflu decreases the time to alleviation by 1 day. That has to be reproduced in phase 3 trials, but it shows the potential of this kind of targeting aging biology for medicine in general.
And you showed also that you affected either viruses, even coronaviruses, not that one, right?
Correct. So COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 wasn't circulating at the time we did our studies, but there were 4 other coronaviruses that were, and we can decrease the amount of people who have coronavirus infections in the 2B by about 50%.
Yeah, I think it's important that we're making a point here that we are agnostic to the virus.
Exactly.
No matter what we'll do, we'll be successful. Okay, so let me go to one of my favorite slides. It's a slide that circulated in Rome in mid-70s. It's John Paul II, and you see him driving a Mercedes limousine. And the story is that he wanted to drive. He asked his driver to go to the back, and a policeman in Rome is stopping him for speeding. And the cop calls his officer and he says, I have a situation, I don't know what to do. I stopped somebody very important for speeding. He said, how do you know he's important? Who is it? He said, I don't know. So how do you know he's important? He said, because the Pope is his driver. And I'm using this just to make the point that things are not always the way they seem. So what are the common misconceptions of aging, the science versus reality? And Judy, I'd like you to have the first round here. What are the misconceptions that you feel people have about the science, about geroscience?
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion between aging and death. And I think that people equate the two, and of course they're related. Nobody dies of good health. But I think the targeting of aging as a process to eliminate disease is really meant to improve the quality of life and to make death not as awful as it is for most of the people who spend the last several years of their lives either paralyzed or mentally incompetent. And I think this is the point, is that we don't know that we can defeat death, despite what Calico might say. But we do know that we can improve the quality of life until such time as we die. I do want to point out that one of the huge mysteries in aging research is we do not know how species-specific lifespan is set. We know that a mouse lives roughly 3 years, humans can live more than 100 years, and yet there's 97% genetic identity And we don't know why it is there's this huge difference in lifespan. So death may be inevitable, but what we'd like to think is that aging is not.
Terrific. I feel the same, and that's why we are not immortalist, and we talk more about health span, right, than lifespan. Ned, from your perspective, running this big unity program, what is the misconception that you face when you go to investors, right?
I would say, I'm going to answer the question. I'll answer the investor question second because it's relatively boring. I'll answer the more broad question about what are the common misconceptions. I believe that the biology we're doing will ultimately be of kind of generational importance. But one of the most common misconceptions is that I believe that what we're doing is overestimated in the short run, but underestimated in the long run. And what I mean by this is, oftentimes the way that what we do is popularized and sensationalized gives it this sort of vibe that these things are coming rapidly and our lives are all going to be transformed in the next year or 5 years. And the reality is that what we're working on now, what all of us are working on now, will profoundly alter the lives, our later lives and that of our children's, but it will happen over a far longer period of time. And the changes will be more profound than I think what we can imagine now. But it's a little bit of cathedral thinking here, in the sense that that's what we're all contributing to in terms of the fundamental biological understandings will take decades to unfold and assemble into an increasingly coherent model, and further decades to ultimately translate into medicines that alter what we're doing. That said, there will be a set of changes that will unfold over the next decade. And I think people who are on this discussion are participating in that. Medicines that will be created that, like what Joan is working on, that successfully and hopefully less toxically can inhibit TOR, possibly the best validated biology to alter the aging clock. We at Unity are working on senolytic medicines, and we have one medicine that's now in phase 2 for osteoarthritis, where we'll have data later this year. And that is a disease that, not to sort of overblow it, but it's the primary reason it hurts to be old, right? And we'll be later this year, we'll be with a senolytic medicine in the eye. The point I'm making is that these are small steps on the road to what will ultimately be the larger transformation that understanding the biology of aging will enable. So I think that's the biggest, grand misunderstanding. As far as investors,
let's get to investors later. But okay. I quote Bill Gates exactly the way you just set it up. Bill Gates said, I don't know when, we are overestimating what we can do in 2 years and underestimating what we can do in 10. And I think that's what you're saying, and I feel kind of the same about that. So let me actually go to the challenge that one of the challenges we have is that there's no indication, an FDA indication for aging. So unlike any other disease, the scientists are involved, the pharmaceuticals are involved, there is a target, and we don't have this option. And I think it's very important for the audience to understand if aging is not recognized as a preventable condition, the healthcare providers don't have to pay for it, okay? And if the healthcare providers are not going to pay for something that targets aging, the pharmaceuticals need a business plan, so they are not going to come in. So really my questions is, what are the major barrier to clinical translation of science and therapies? And maybe Steve will start with you, and then Joan, you have so many good examples of the barriers. So we'll go to you after that. Steve, what is your initial reaction?
I think you've already captured a lot of this, near that what is that indication that we go after, and we're each as companies now going after individual indications first to learn about aging in the long term. And I think the process is going to have to be go through some very recognized indications and learn a lot on the way, learn from biomarkers. As Ned said, we're going to learn findings in these early studies that will help us get to that point of aging therapeutics ultimately, but we have to take this piece by piece on the way. So I think it's trying to go too far too quick, we are going to solve aging or develop a therapy for aging today. We don't have to do that. We can go through individual indications first and build those learnings on the way. So I think that we're learning how to do trials, but we've got to learn to build more endpoints into these trials right now so that we learn about aging, we learn about the wider, broader implications of these therapies as we go through development paths. So I think there is really a buy-in from VCs, maybe not yet from farmers so much about aging being the ultimate. As we work through the indications, we build the knowledge base, then I think it's getting there. And I also said the FDA are very open to these discussions. I've been very encouraged that this is not just a roadblock from moving into these sort of therapeutic discussions. They're willing to think the long term in this, but it will be a gradual process, as Ned indicated.
And Joan,
can I hop in here?
Yeah.
And I think Joan should hop in after me, because I'm going to sort of suggest. I've been asked this question a great deal about what does the future look like as it relates to how FDA will interact with aging. And obviously, Nir, you've been working hard on the metformin effort to create essentially a set of clinical endpoints that reflect what we could call aging, and to measure them and to seek an approval path. And that is one way. I sort of think of that as the push approach to the agency. There's also what I've imagined an alternative future is what I call the pull. And that's a situation in which any one of us participating here, whether it's Joan, Stephen, or myself or Judy who are working on senolytic medicines, when a medicine which is developed for a disease like osteoarthritis or something in the eye or cognition, when such a drug is developed that as a side effect extends health span and extends lifespan, and that drug begins to get lots of use, not for the disease, but for those ancillary benefits, I could see the agency coming in and creating guidance in response to that, because they would have to. Anyway, it's an alternative way to think how this could unfold.
Yeah, let me just say about that. There are clinical studies for any endpoint we have in the TAME study of metformin, okay? In other words, what you said, you have enough data to suggest that that's it, but it hasn't really been translated because the doctors are conservative and the FDA is like, we're calling the shot. So I think the concept, my view on those things, it's not or, it's and. We have to do what you just said, and we have to do a study and to have an indication so that anything that you want to repurpose, that's what you're saying. That's what we're doing with metformin. We're repurposing a drug, right? We'll have drugs. We'll have senolytic for arthritis. We'll repurpose that. But I think you still have to have an indication in order to pharmaceuticals to come in and have this vision that they can sell it to many more people than before. Joan, I wanted to ask you, you've been busy in trying to sell it not only to the FDA, to BARDA and others. Where do you see the problem? They don't believe in the concept of aging, or what are your challenges? You're mute.
I think some of the fun of being in this field is it's so uncharted, and we really are going into a new area of science. And because of that, there isn't a roadmap that we can follow. We have to pave the path, and that's high risk. And we're going to stumble on some of this. And, you know, for instance, our phase 3, the FDA's never dealt with a drug that improves the function of the aging immune system and is sort of a pan-antiviral. So they had to sort of come up in their own head on what they thought an endpoint should be, which maybe wasn't the right endpoint, or maybe it's the problem is our drug isn't the right drug. But all of these things, to Ned's point, they have to be worked through. And it's going to take, in the short run, just, you know, figuring it out. You do an experiment, sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not, but it's going to keep moving the field forward as we gain this knowledge about what does and doesn't work. We're going to be the pioneers, but once we work this out, I think it's just this enormous sea change in medicine that this is going to lead to. And the biotechs and the pharmas and the investors are going to all be jumping on board. And I think we have to still have the perseverance and the vision to understand, you know, we see the goal and to keep going for that goal and figuring it out, and, you know, just having people understand the potential and the importance of what we're doing.
Well, Joan, I really hope that you stay positive and stay negative with the COVID-19, but that's really great.
Right.
So I want to go to another issue. What you see here is something I've actually been working with Judy a little bit about, that is results of proteomic from people between 65 and 95. So we have 5,000 proteins in thousands of people, in 1,000 of people, and we're asking what's changing between 65 and 95. And you see these hot lava stones that are coming. The higher they go, the more statistical significant, and the farther they go, the more effect it is. And you see that there's a lot of discovery. And those are biomarkers of aging, and that's a proteome biomarkers of aging. But I'm asking you, Steve, first, what does the next 5 to 10 years look like for the longevity biomarkers? And I should frame it even better. It's one thing to know the biological versus chronological age. It's another thing to have biomarkers that will change when we give the treatment that targets aging. So how are you and your company looking at that?
I totally agree. I think biomarkers are going to be key in the near term to see that we can change signals. And I'm sort of biased towards the plasma proteome. As you know, we're working on developing therapeutics from understandings of the young plasma proteome on aging and age-related disorders. We see this as being a dynamic compartment where you do actually see changes. And I think that all the trials that we run, the resTORbio run, that Unity run, we need to be looking at a range of the biomarkers and what is shifted. I think what most excites me from Joan's trials is to go and now dig into those deeper biomarkers as well. What were we changing more globally? So our view is that we have to look at a broad range of biomarkers. You know, plasma proteome for us is a key action point in this. But we want to look at epigenetics. I think the epigenetic clock is definitely a fascinating biomarker, but it's been hard to actually move the epigenetic clock. Yes, it's a good chronological clock, but can you actually modulate that? So we need to find these biomarkers that we have the ability to manipulate. So we're going through looking at the plasma compartment. We're looking at epigenetics in cells. We look at CSF even in brain indications. I think also going towards activity measures, other big data aspects that we can tap into and look at what are the changes through aging and how do they correlate with any treatment. Just hitting one of the known aging biologies, how does that change these profiles? And that's how we'll piece together what is going on. So our perspective is at this stage, we have to look broadly at biomarkers. We don't know the biomarker to run with today. let's look broadly, let's learn from this, and let's learn from all the trials that are out there. And that's where I hope we can share the data very early on this, share the data sets, so that we learn from each other in this. I don't think it's one of those things that a single therapy is going to be able to give you the whole answer. So let's look at all answers, all potential data points together.
So even for treatments, you'll need several biomarkers. By the way, one of the things that initially annoyed me in my result, there was lots of breakdown. There was breakdown of collagen and extracellular metrics and degranulation of platelets and white cell fat. And I said, okay, that's the noise. And then I thought about it next and I said, no, that's actually the breakdown that happens with aging. And no matter how we're going to treat it, we're going to stop this breakdown. So maybe it's actually going to be more important biomarkers. So
I agree with that there is a biology that we're learning, but there's also been an issue with many of these biomarkers that technical challenges come in, how you actually collect plasma, how you handle it. The proteome is not the most stable, and you do get breakdown anyway just from technical challenges. So that will be one of our go forwards challenges, to have protocols which are comparable between different studies and making sure that we are able to extract the true biology from some of these technical issues.
Judy, would you like biomarkers for senolytics?
Of course. Actually, we are working with the Baltimore Longitudinal Study, Luigi Ferrucci's group, to see what fraction of his biomarkers might be due to the presence of senescent cells. And of course, that would then give us a handle on knowing whether a senolytic is working or not in a human. But I want to point out something about biomarkers. I think the public tends to think of biomarkers as being a protein or a small group of proteins, and that's probably unrealistic. There's probably going to be a large panel. We're going to need bioinformaticists and artificial intelligence to really deconvolute all of the, I mean, look at how many proteins have been, in Steve's slide, over next to 800 different proteins. And in addition to proteins, there are also metabolites, and there are small molecules that might be more stable. And there's now beginning to be an interest in trying to harness those small metabolites. The beauty of those is you can probably get them out of urine, which is the least invasive way to develop a biomarker panel for humans.
Terrific. So let me move on, remind you that we have those hallmarks, remind you that we did do a lot by looking at animals that live longer, even humans that live longer, and we've established not only that healthy lifespan can be changed, but also that there are relevant drugs out there. So with this in the background, I'm asking not about the biomarkers, but about therapeutics. And Ned, maybe you started that, so maybe you develop it a little bit more. Next 5-10 years, longevity therapeutics. I should say just one thing that you said before that made me laugh. We'll have to train geriatricians. Geriatricians, when somebody old comes and say, I have pains, he said, look, the geriatrician will say, look, if you wake up in the morning and you have no pain, you're dead. And now you'll have to change it and say, you're in senolytics, right?
Well, we're going to see how well it plays out. But going to your question, which is, what do the next, say, 10 years have for us? I can only offer predictions based on what I see in the present, but I will share with you what I see. So I maintain that the best validated aging way to perturb aging biologically is targeting of mTOR. And it's something that obviously Joan has been working on. There are a variety of groups figuring out how we can dose that differently, shorter, to have very long-term consequences. Someone is going to figure that out. in the coming years. And I suspect that's going to be a player that in this whole area. I think there's now a lot of people working in making senolytic medicines. Unity is just one player. We're doing our best to be successful in that, but it remains too early to say who is going to be successful there. As mentioned, we have one program in mid-stage clinical trials, which will read out later this year. We have another program entering trials also later in the year, that's in the eye. But there are a bunch of other players using different approaches to do this. And I don't think it's particularly important which company succeeds. I think it's very important that we as a collective succeed. I think this area that Stephen's working in is going to yield fruit in various shapes and forms. This whole concept that there are circulating youth factors present in young blood. These are going to become medicines, whether or not they are blood fractions, which seems kind of tricky, or whether or not the blood fractions are going to be used to identify therapeutic proteins that can be used. There will be a circulating youth factor, in late stage trials are approved within a decade. And I believe that the really cool stuff that's going to happen in aging biology won't be a medicine in the next 10 years, but there will be something that we don't have a word for yet, some mechanism that is going to be one of those, oh my gosh, moments that will get discovered in the next 10 years. And I eagerly await to see what that is. But as we know, if you look at a tiny shrew, it lives less than a year, and a bowhead whale lives for about 200. What is going on? There is so much play space available that natural biology gives us if we only understood what knobs to turn. And I am optimistic that in the next decade or two, some of those knobs are going to make themselves known, and we will build medicines against them.
Steve, in these proteomic things that we're doing, we have two groups of people. 500 are offspring of centenarians, and they're very healthy, and 500 are just regularly older adults. And the offspring of centenarians have 29 proteins that are unique to them. They're not in the older group, including some spermidine, clotto, other things of protein. So tell me more about the protein, or what your company is looking as the 5-10 years therapeutic option.
Yeah, I think that we are definitely going down this path that we have to understand the specific proteins which are drivers of this. The plasma fractions are a near-term possibility to move into the clinic, but we need to do the basic research very rigorously to understand what are the bioactives, what truly are the pathways that we're hitting, how is this biology working. And I think we are going to get clues from centenarians, we're going to get clues from 80-year-old marathon runners. I think there are certain outlier populations who are really going to help us to understand the forefronts of the biology to hit here. So yes, we are actually mapping through, here are the proteins that we think are the drivers, here are the ones that we think are the key players. We may need more than one to be truly therapeutic ultimately, but you've got to map that science out. And I think it's one of the moves has to be away from these black boxes of, yes, young plasma sounds nice, or caloric restriction alone sounds nice. We've got to get the true research understandings and make this field really rigorous in its science. I think it's one of the criticisms that has been in the field, that the science has been a little soft in the past. I've certainly seen in the past 5 years that has really solidified, and now we're at a point where the scientific underpinnings of all of our therapeutics are very strong. And we're going to have truly science-built therapeutics in the next 5 to 10 years.
Joan, if somebody would buy your company for $3 billion and say, you cannot touch mTOR anymore, what would you do?
Leave.
No, you'd leave and take maybe something else. Is there something else that's interesting to you? in the field?
You know, I think it's really important to be open-minded here. I think the senolytics, it's a great, you know, area of science. I think Steve's, you know, plasma proteome, getting a deep dive in that, it is a great field. There's so much interesting science to be done. I think the Yamanaka factors are so interesting, figuring out, can we harness those to, you know, reverse aging related conditions. It's wide open and untapped. And any of these fields, I think, would be such an exciting place to go.
So I put, you raised the Yamamoto factors, and I put a picture of a blastocyte. So, you know, we can basically take a sperm of a 70-year-old person and actually identify the age, and an egg of a 50-year-old woman, and we can get this baby out of them. And what happens when those cells of the babies are starting to divide in the blastocytes, they erase age. They don't remember age. We don't remember the age. It's not accumulating here. So we figured out how to do it inside our body. Can we figure out to do it in other? Can we erase aging every now and then? We don't know, but this is kind of where we can head the post. So what is the realistic impact of longevity therapeutics discovery and development on near and long-term health span and life expectancy? So this is our final moment to say what you didn't say before, and what is your wildest vision, and how the future will be the way you see it. Let's start with you, Judy. Judy, if you're talking, you're on mute. Joan, why don't you go?
Well, I think the Yamanaka factor science is really fascinating. And if there were some way to transiently turn on reprogramming by Yamanaka factors and then turn it off, because of course the risk is if you turn Yamanaka factors on for too long, you will end up with cancer. If we can figure out a way to safely turn them on and reprogram old tissue to a young tissue state, it would be phenomenal and, you know, again, be a transformative medical therapy.
Terrific. Ned, you're mute.
So I find this stuff with epigenetic reprogramming very seductive, and it's an area that I've been following closely and have gotten to know people that work in the space. I do worry it's a bit like taking a scratched up vinyl record and somehow managing to erase the scratches without erasing the music. Doesn't mean it can't be done, okay? But it's gonna require a series of very clever insights to make that possible. And I think it's gonna be a confluence of really understanding the basic biology of cell fate and establishing once and for all that actually these epigenetic changes actually drive aging. That has not been established, that this epigenetic drift that is observed actually drives a phenotype. And I await the day to see evidence of that convincingly. And it's something that I follow closely. But you know, what I think, the realistic impact here is that we are going to be essentially making small moves, okay? You know, through TOR inhibition, through circulating youth factors, senolytic medicine or 2 or 3. But as I was saying before, what will really fire the future and our imagination and you know, this area of science will be some new insights that we don't even have words for yet. And I think an example of it is like something like epigenetic reprogramming. That's the kind of category of awesome, cool stuff that once elucidated, described biologically, will become the next frontier. So I'm just, everyone should just be open-minded to what that's going to look like when it makes an appearance, because you might, when it first shows up, you won't necessarily know how powerful it is, but just keep your eyes open.
Well, we're talking now of herd immunity. How many percentage of the population should be infected so that the rest are protected, right, from the COVID-19? My herd immunity question is, how many people need still to hear that aging can be targeted and modulated before we get a front seat anywhere, before the politicians are hearing us, before the FDA is hearing us? And I think this is the realistic thing that I'm looking for. I want the public, and I want the pharmaceuticals, and I want the FDA to push us and not the other way around, because what you're all saying, and I agree, we actually had to decrease our expectations, right? I mean, you thought senolytic will be just the thing for everything, and now you're saying, no, we have to do small steps and many steps and all around, and we need to have this aging herd immunity. The people will say, well, we expect you to help us to age, and that's not happening realistically right now. Judy, any last words? I'll go for everyone. Any last thoughts? Something we didn't talk about and you want to say? Or Judy,
I would say, Judy, you there? Joan, you're muted.
Ned,
Judy's having internet connection issue.
I guess I would say in closing, Nir, to answer your question, which is that I think the way that this field is unfolding is appropriate and fine. I believe that once the first definitive clinical evidence exists, we can take a feature of aging and with a intervention medically send it backwards, that will become a fulcrum point in people's awareness, that the targeting of an aging mechanism becomes a means to target aging and diseases of aging. That has not really happened yet. And when it does, I think things will begin to change. And I think then the future that you hope we're in the present will arrive.
Steve?
I think we're also doing actually very well as a field, and I think aspects such as the COVID situation now triggering these things, we're going to understand more of the biology of susceptibilities and hook on to this fact that the underlying aging biology is actually something important. We're probably going to have more and more of these infections going on. There'll be a transition of the way we have to think about medicine with COVID. With the past, we've been doing a lot of work on monogenic, rare disorders. We've got to hit a broader swathe of the population, and this is a mechanistic approach, a scientific approach, which can actually change the way we think about medicine, have reality for COVID, for many disorders that are increasing in prevalence, Alzheimer's diseases, diabetes, other disorders, and this thinking bigger is actually going to become much more reality in people's minds.
Joan?
So I think we're getting really, really close to having our first drug that's going to be targeting aging biology and approved. And I don't think people understand how close this is. And I think once that happens, that's really going to open up sort of investors, biotechs, and pharma. And I also think we're making much more progress than maybe we realize in having people start understanding that this is serious science that actually can be targeted as a new area of medicine. And I even remember when we first went out as resTORbio and talked to people about, it's really a problem, the aging immune system, it causes people to get more viral respiratory tract infections. Investors would just yawn, like, who cares? And COVID-19 is this opportunity where they're going, oh, now I get it. Now I get what the problem is. And I think taking advantage of the situation right now and telling our story and telling how, you know, people, this is a way where we can prevent this terrible outcomes of this disease with this new kind of targeting biology is an opportunity we need to take advantage of.
So with those words, I'd like to close this panel. Thank you, guys. This was really so interesting. And I want to underline the fact that, you know, you're from companies and scientists, and there's nothing but a very realistic approach, which I think in the long run is good for us. Look, I think scientists are going to be the winner of what happened now. We can see that Fauci has a 77% approval rate and Trump only 41. But more important, we see that the Pope that I mentioned before, another Pope, is telling Christians not to go to church. And the Ramadan is not going to Mass. And the Jewish rabbi said, don't come to the synagogue. So science trump even religion now. I think we'll have a new respect. I think we'll have new responsibilities. And I'm, like you, very optimistic that we'll defend the host in the next, maybe this epidemic and next epidemic. And thank you for those interesting points that you brought up. Thanks so much.